Hi, I'm Brett Burns. You might know me from my poetry and music that I've shared, but today I want to introduce you to something I've been working on my entire life. Three interconnected systems: the God who eats, anchor core, and the equation of flourishing. This isn't dogma, this is a way of seeing the world and finding the sacred in how life actually works. Let me show you what that means. So before I dive in, I want to be honest about what this is. This isn't something I created alone. My best friend Troy helped me shape the God Who Eats framework. Another friend, Jake, translated my moral compass into the equation of flourishing. Throughout this series, you'll meet them. They'll explain their pieces. I'm going to use the language of spirituality, words like sacred and divine, but I'm grounding all of this in observable reality, in science, in what actually happens in nature. Think of it as post-theology, spirituality that doesn't ask you to believe in anything impossible, just to look at how the world actually works and ask, what if that's holy? Because here's the truth. I can't prove what happens after death. Nobody can. But I can show you what happens during death at every level. And I can show you why that might be the most important thing to understand. So what is the God who eats? At its core, it's the personification of a dance that's been operating since the universe began, 13.8 billion years ago, and it sustained life on this planet for 4 billion of those years. There are two forces constantly at work everywhere. First, entropy, disorder, breakdown. Things fall apart. This is the second law of thermodynamics. The most relentless force in existence. Energy disperses, structures decay. Second, emergence, self-organization, the spontaneous creation of complexity from chaos. Why atoms arrange into molecules, molecules into cells, and cells into organisms. Here's the key. These aren't enemies, they're partners. They require each other. Without entropy, without breakdown, there would be no energy available for anything to exist. Without emergence, without self-organization, energy would just dissipate into nothing. The God who eats is the personification of this partnership. It's what happens when these two forces dance together, creating and sustaining all life. It's not conscious, it's not a being watching you, it's a pattern, a self-correcting, infinitely resilient pattern that needs no conscious intelligence to operate. So I've written a 3-part poem sequence to capture this theology. Let me read you some excerpts. The unwelcome one. This is death arriving, uninvited, unstoppable, universal. I feast on moonlit gasps that choke the throat of night, as neurons shatter, splintering into void's embrace. Your mind collapses, spark snuffed by ravenous blight. I creep through arteries so deep, gnaw through bone and tear through ironclad stone. My hunger knows no boundary, no sleep. This is the God who eats arriving. Death isn't something that happens to the unlucky, it's the fabric of existence itself. It's not cruel, it's not unjust, it simply is. But here's where the theology shifts. Death isn't the ending of the story, it's the beginning of the next one. Here's an excerpt from my poem, Symphony of Rot. I awaken in a cathedral of crackling chitin, each shell fragment a brittle hymn beneath my feet. My breath is a corrosion of ammonia and butyric acid, the warm sting of rotted butter swirling in my lungs. I roar with the snap of mycelial wires, filaments tearing through tendons as I feast. My tongue, a mucilaginous ribbon, laps at marrow's buttery pool. I am the glory of collapse, the architect of corruption. This is the God who eats conducting its sacred work. Bacteria, fungi, worms, systematically transforming complexity into simplicity. From the perspective of what is decomposing, this is loss. From the perspective of the whole system, it's the mechanism of renewal. And then what emerges from that decay? Here's an excerpt from my poem, Gift of Life. I cradle every fallen trace, my soft decree upon the loam. Each root that wakes from winter sleep, each seed that finds its home. I shelter in my mycelial arms, a network vast and deep. So rise, you emerald fugitives, from ruin's rich refrain. This is the capstone. What began as darkness, the systematic breakdown of form, becomes the preconditions for the new emergence. The horror isn't negated, it's composted. The tragedy becomes the preconditions for new beauty. This is the God who eats most radical teaching. What we call evil, destruction, horror, if integrated into the larger pattern, becomes the mechanisms of renewal. Okay, so this same pattern repeats at every level of existence. At the cellular level, a mitochondrion, the powerhouse of the cell, constantly breaks down nutrients. That's entropy in action, complex molecules becoming simpler, releasing energy as heat. But that released energy powers the cell to maintain its structure, resists entropy's pull, stay organized and alive. The breakdown feeds the building up. Death feeds life at the smallest scale. At the microscopic level, I wrote a poem about a fungus colonizing a cricket. Let me read you a bit. O magnificent plague across the cricket's form, your pale threads weave through decomposing shell, while spores drift soft in morning's gentle light. Each enzyme feast breaks down what used to be. Lyopes racing through the silent core, Apersoria gripping like tiny claws that anchor death to resurrection's door. What looked like disease was actually transformation, death feeding emergence. At the ecological level, let me read you an excerpt from my poem, Confluence. The hunt is not cruelty, but conversation, ancient as mountains, necessary as rain. When fang meets flesh, when silk meets wing, the universe acknowledges what we try to deny, that life and death are partners in creation. The wolf's hunt isn't morally wrong, it's ecologically necessary. By culling weak deer, the wolf maintains population health. By being predated, deer ensure predators exist to keep balance. Neither could exist without the other. They're partners, not enemies. Partners in a cycle that sustain them both. At the cosmic level, stars embody this most dramatically. A star spends billions of years fusing hydrogen into helium. Eventually, it exhausts its fuel, collapses, and explodes. All that energy, all those heavy elements forged in its core, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, iron, scattered into space. These elements seed new nebulae, new stars form around them, new planets coalesce, life emerges on those planets, built from stardust created by stellar death. So a star must die for carbon-based life to exist. The universe requires stellar entropy for emergence to be possible. So the pattern is identical everywhere. Death and life aren't opposing forces, but the same force, operating at different scales. Here's where this becomes theology rather than just description. The God who eats isn't static equilibrium. It's not some perfect balance frozen in place. It's what chaos scientists call a dynamic attractor, a pattern towards which systems constantly flow, like water spiraling down a drain, like a predator-prey cycle oscillating between high and low populations, like an ecosystem recovering from a forest fire. This means perfection isn't fixed, it's always shifting. And here's the radical part. Disturbances aren't failures. They're how the systems maintain resilience. A forest needs fire. An ecosystem needs predators. A body needs constant death and renewal of cells. So the harmony comes through oscillation, not stasis. When you make peace with this, when you stop seeing death as a flaw in the system and start seeing it as the mechanism that makes life possible, everything shifts. So now, what does this actually mean for you? The worst case scenario is annihilation. Total cessation of consciousness. The void. Nothingness. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding this thought, distracting themselves, seeking immortality through legacy, faith, achievement, anything but facing the void. The God who eats asks you to do something radical. Sit with your own annihilation. Contemplate it directly until it stops terrifying you. Not because nothing definitely happens after, but because if nothing happens and you've already accepted that possibility, then you're free. Here's what changes when you genuinely accept your own mortality. You stop performing for eternity. You stop competing as if individual survival is the point. You stop denying the web that sustains you, because you finally understand you're going to feed the system, whether you like it or not. The only choice is whether you'll do it consciously, with intention and compassion. And here's where it becomes a little revolutionary. Once you're completely okay with nothingness, once you've made peace with total annihilation as the most likely outcome, then you can hold what ifs without desperation. What if there's reincarnation? What if consciousness continues in some form we can't articulate? What if there's something beyond what we can imagine? I'm not claiming those things don't happen. I'm not claiming they do. What I'm saying is this: when you stop grasping at those possibilities out of terror, they transform your lifelines into gifts. If you need reincarnation to be true in order to face death, you're still in denial. But if you've already accepted annihilation, if you've already made peace with the void, then any continuation of consciousness becomes a beautiful bonus. Hope without grasping, wonder without demand. So the framework allows for mystery. It just doesn't require certainty about it. The only real question becomes, how will I live my life now? And that's a question worth asking. That's a question worth dying for, actually. So let me end with this. You don't have to believe in the God who eats. You don't have to worship it, but you can recognize it. The next time you see mushrooms erupting from rotting wood, you're seeing it. The next time you observe leaves becoming soil that feeds new trees, you're witnessing it. The next time you contemplate your own mortality and something inside you surrenders, stops fighting, that's the God who eats, teaching you. So this is the first in a series of explorations. Next week, I'll be introducing Anchor Core, the 8-principle framework that describes how the God who eats operates across all scales of existence. But for now, observe the decay, honor the cycle, recognize that your dissolution will feed countless beginnings. This is enough. This is everything. If this resonated with you, subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And I'll see you next week for Anchor Core.